The clouds hung low like a woolen blanket, smothering the peaks of the North Cascades, turning the summer sky an ominous shade of slate. Charlotte, 27, adjusted the straps of her heavy backpack, feeling the sting in her lower back intensify with each step. The trail ahead twisted upward into a pass called Raven Spine, notorious for sudden weather shifts and drop-offs that vanished into fog. Sweat clung to her skin, and every inch of her ached, not from the hike, but from the pain that had begun earlier that morning, deep in her pelvis, rhythmic and unforgiving. She told herself it was just Braxton Hicks, false alarms. The baby wasn't due for another 3 weeks. But the pressure in her hips, the sharp cramps radiating around her back, the heaviness, something was off. Still, she kept going. There was no signal, no town nearby, just miles of wilderness and a fiancé who'd left 2 days ago for a side trail to photograph elk. He was supposed to return by morning, but now it was past noon. Alone, pregnant, contracting, on a trail. Charlotte clutched a moss-covered tree to steady herself as another surge of pain tore through her. Her legs trembled. The trail beneath her boots was muddy and unstable, carved by last night's rain. Thunder rumbled in the distance. She looked around, panic starting to claw its way up her throat. She had no choice. She couldn't go forward, not like this, and she couldn't go back. She had to get off the trail, find shelter, and figure out what to do next. With every contraction, the realization sank deeper. She wasn't going to make it back in time. She was going to have her baby here, on the mountain. Branches scraped her arms as she pushed through underbrush, veering off the path in search of shelter. She found a shallow cave behind a curtain of ivy, barely big enough to crouch in. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. Lightning flashed, illuminating the world in stark white for a second. She fell to her knees, clutching her swollen belly, crying now, not out of fear, but a strange primal resolve. She took off her soaked jacket and spread it beneath her. Her mind raced. She remembered snippets from her birthing class. Breathe through the pain, don't push too soon, stay calm. But her body had already decided the baby was coming. The contractions grew closer, stronger. Time lost all meaning. Hours could have passed or minutes. She screamed, her voice echoing into the canyon. Birds scattered. Somewhere above her, a hawk shrieked. The storm had passed, but the wind had turned cruel, whispering through the trees like ghosts. Alone, shivering, her hands coated in mud and blood, Charlotte pushed with everything she had. Her body ripped, her mind shattered. And then, silence. A sound, a cry, weak but alive. A boy, a tiny boy, slick with birth and mountain air. She wrapped him in the flannel shirt she'd packed as an extra layer. Her hands trembled as she held him to her chest. His breath was shallow, but steady. She'd done it. She had given birth on a mountain, in a cave, surrounded by pine and thunder, her screams swallowed by wind. But as the adrenaline faded, reality returned. She was bleeding. A lot. Dizzy. The world spun. She pressed her palm between her legs to slow it, her other arm wrapped tightly around the newborn. She whispered, "You hold on, okay? Mama's here." Her voice was hoarse, her vision dimming. "You hold on." The next thing she remembered was a voice. A man, shouting her name. Not the baby's father. No, it was someone else. A hiker. A stranger who'd heard her cries echoing down the ridge. His name was David. He'd been searching for wild mushrooms when he stumbled upon her cave. His face had gone pale when he saw the blood. The baby, the woman clinging to life. He used his belt to apply pressure, wrapped the baby tighter, and somehow, miraculously, got a signal to call in search and rescue. Hours later, a chopper landed on a rocky outcrop just below the trail, blades slicing the air like salvation. Charlotte, barely conscious, was airlifted alongside her son, her fingers refusing to let go of his tiny foot even as medics tried to separate them. In the hospital, days blurred into each other. Her fiancé arrived too late. He never made it to the cave, never knew the agony, the blood, the howling wind. When he saw the baby, he cried, but something in Charlotte had shifted. A strength had awakened in that mountain cave. She realized she no longer needed a partner who disappeared when she needed him most. She chose to raise her son alone. She named him River. after the force that cuts through rock, relentless and determined. He was born in a storm, on a trail where maps didn't reach, cradled by a woman who had nothing but her will to survive. And that story, his story, followed him like a shadow as he grew. River didn't just grow strong. He grew obsessed. Obsessed with wilderness, with survival, with rescuing others like the man who rescued his mother. As a boy, he memorized maps. As a teen, he joined every ranger program he could find. At 18, he wore the uniform of a mountain rescue ranger, his badge gleaming in the same light that once lit his mother's cave. And one day, almost 2 decades after that storm, a call came in, an injured hiker on Raven Spine. He answered, and when he reached her, his mother, limping, breathless, leaning against a familiar tree. Neither said a word at first, just silence, and then a smile. The mountain had brought them full circle. If you felt the strength of a mother's love and a son's return to the place where life began, comment your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for the next part of this powerful journey. The storm howled as if the mountain itself was trying to scare her back. But Lena pressed on, clutching her swollen belly with one hand and leaning against the cold rock face with the other. She was drenched, trembling, and losing blood. Every contraction hit like a tidal wave, each more violent than the last. Trees thrashed in the wind like angry spirits, and the trail had long disappeared under her feet. There's only rock, mud, and the memory of where the path used to be. Her flashlight flickered and died. The darkness swallowed her, and for a moment, she knelt on the ground, sobbing. But then something shifted, not in the storm, not in the sky, but inside her. A scream welled up from her soul and burst out of her throat, the raw sound echoing off the cliffs like a war cry. Her water broke. There was no time to think. Her body took over. She tore off her raincoat, spreading it over a flat patch of dirt just beneath a ledge. The rocks above shielded her from the worst of the downpour, but it was still cold, bitterly cold, and she could feel her strength ebbing fast. Her knees gave way. Her fingers dug into the soil as another contraction struck, and this time, she screamed louder. In that moment, time ceased to exist. There was no mountain, no world, only pain and purpose. And then it happened. A cry. A real, tiny, living cry cut through the storm. A baby. Her baby. Her vision swam as she reached for him, cradling his slippery body to her chest. Blood soaked her legs. She was shaking uncontrollably. But the baby, he was breathing. She didn't even know how, but he was. She wrapped him in the inside of her jacket, whispering prayers she barely remembered learning. "You're safe. You're safe. I promise," she kept saying as her voice cracked and her eyelids fluttered. But she wasn't safe. Not yet. Her phone was dead. The storm showed no sign of letting up, and she was drifting somewhere between waking and sleep, reality and unconsciousness. Her fingers were blue. Her body curled around the newborn like a cocoon, guarding him from the biting wind. She thought of his name. Eli, she whispered, short for Elijah, her grandfather's name, the man who used to bring her up here years ago, before everything changed. Then came footsteps, real ones. Or was it her mind playing tricks? A voice yelling her name? No, real. Boots stomped through the mud. A beam of light. Lena Harlow. She tried to answer, but only a hoarse breath escaped. The light stopped. A man crouched beside her, a ranger. He looked stunned. "Holy, oh God, dispatch, I found her. She's here. She's alive. She has a baby. We need medevac now." Hands touched her, lifted her. She clung to Eli as they wrapped them both in emergency blankets. The ranger's voice, calm but shaken, told her she'd made it. Barely. She passed out in the helicopter. And when she woke up 2 days later in the hospital, Eli was sleeping peacefully beside her. Alive, against all odds. That moment, the warmth of his tiny body, the scent of new life, the soft beep of hospital machines, was the single brightest thing Lena had ever known. She vowed that day never to tell him the full story of his birth. Not yet. Not until he was old enough to understand what it cost. Not until he could carry the weight of it. But Eli grew fast, faster than she could keep up. He was walking by 10 months, climbing before he turned 2. By 5, he was obsessed with maps and compasses, building trails with sticks in a backyard, and dreaming of becoming a forest ranger. Every time Lena saw him run barefoot through the woods behind their little house in Spokane, her heart clenched, part pride, part fear. She'd never told him the truth, that he was born on a trail during the worst storm in years, with no one but her and the wind and the mountain. She watched him grow into a boy who loved the very wilderness that nearly killed them both. He didn't just survive the mountain, he belonged to it. But sometimes, late at night, Lena would stare at the old hiking boots in her closet, the ones she wore when he was born, still caked with dried mud from that day. And she'd wonder, if she ever told him everything, would he still run toward the mountain? Or would he run away? If you felt the weight of Lena's journey and the miracle of Eli's birth, don't forget to like. The wind howled through the tall pines like a song only the mountains could understand, and Mira stood still, her eyes stinging with tears that had nothing to do with the cold. The mountain trail hadn't changed. The same jagged rock she'd leaned against during her contractions still jutted out by the switchback. The same old pine tree, slightly bent like an old man with secrets, stood sentinel where she'd cried out in agony 18 years ago. And now, her son, Elias, in full rescue ranger uniform, walked a few feet ahead, tall, broad-shouldered, his voice calm but steady as he radioed dispatch about their pace and terrain. "Mom, you okay?" he asked, turning around with a face that had grown from her own pain. Mira nodded, her throat tight, her mind flooded by the night he was born. She remembered the icy rain soaking through her coat, the shriek of the wind, the blood she couldn't stop, and the silence that came when she thought both their lives would end. Back then, the trail was merciless, but Elias had survived. And now, he was leading her down it, not as a lost baby in a desperate woman's arms, but as a man of strength, trained to protect others. "You know, this path saved me," he said quietly as they reached a clearing. "I studied every inch of it during training. I had to. I needed to face the place I was born." Myra's knees buckled slightly at his words, but Elias caught her, strong and gentle. Her son, her miracle, the boy who was born in the dirt and wind, whose first breath had been stolen and returned by her trembling hands. They stopped where she had once buried the small blanket she'd wrapped him in that night, thinking no one would ever find them. Now, Elias knelt and gently brushed away leaves and soil, uncovering the old fabric, tattered but intact. He looked up at her, tears in his eyes. "I found it years ago," he whispered. "I've kept it all this time." Mira collapsed beside him, sobbing, holding that small piece of fabric as if it were her child all over again. "I didn't want you to hate this place," she choked. "I thought it would haunt you." Elias looked out over the ridge. "It doesn't haunt me, Mom. It built me." That night, they camped by the old trail, a fire crackling between them and the stars blazing overhead. As Elias told her about the rescues he'd done, the families he'd saved, the hikers he'd carried, Mira saw the full circle of what love and endurance had created. The boy who had nearly died was now saving lives. He didn't just survive the mountain. He became part of it. And somewhere deep in her bones, Mira felt the past start to heal, like a scar warmed by firelight. The avalanche hadn't just buried the trail in snow. It buried May's breath in her chest as well, because she recognized the exact curve of the path they stood on when the tremor rumbled beneath their feet. It was the same curve she'd collapsed on 18 years ago. Panic surged through her as ice cracked beneath their boots, memories flashing like ghosts, her legs numb, her stomach tightening, and the sound of her own scream lost in the wind as she gave birth to Kai with only darkness and prayer around her. But this time, she wasn't alone. Kai, steady and calm, radioed in their location, his voice firm but gentle, the kind that could soothe chaos. He had grown into a man she couldn't recognize but still felt in her bones. Wide shoulders wrapped in a neon rescue jacket, a scar slicing above his brow from a climbing accident he'd never told her about, and eyes the exact amber hue of the stormy dusk that had witnessed his first breath. When May tripped on a hidden root and cried out, Kai was at her side in a heartbeat, gripping her arm like an anchor, reminding her softly, "I've got you. I won't let you fall again." It wasn't just physical. He had become her safety. As they navigated around the frozen ridge, the wind howled loud enough to drown her heartbeat. But she heard him, always him, reading her every motion, slowing when her breath caught, pausing when her knees shook. He handed her a thermos of tea he brewed himself, cinnamon and ginger, just like the kind she used to make, and she finally broke. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "This isn't your burden." But he only smiled, tugging his scarf higher. "It's not a burden if I choose it." That night, they made shelter beneath the rocky outcrop, the same one that had shielded them both all those years ago. And when May lay awake, staring at the ceiling of stars flickering through the snow-drenched sky, she whispered the same lullaby she'd once hummed to a nameless baby in the cold. She didn't know he remembered it, until Kai softly joined her voice in harmony. Something inside her unraveled then, not from fear, but from healing. The boy born in pain had grown into a man who gave her peace. And as the fire crackled and cast dancing shadows across his face, May realized something else. This return wasn't about repaying fate or proving strength. It was about circling back to the place that nearly ended her to see that it had instead created the very thing that saved her. The mountain didn't defeat her. It gave her Kai. And now, he was leading her not away from danger, but into something deeper. Forgiveness. Acceptance. A full circle she never thought she'd live to walk. Asterisk if this part of the story moved you. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for the next part. Let us know, what do you think May is still hiding? Asterisk the day she had dreaded yet quietly prepared for all these years arrived in a way that knocked the wind out of her soul. Eva sat on her front porch in a folding chair with a blanket around her knees, holding a steaming mug of tea she hadn't sipped. Her hair had more silver now, and her right knee ached like a persistent drumbeat from the cold mountain air. She hadn't been back to the trail in 18 years, not since her hands were bloodied catching her newborn's head on a forest floor covered in pine needles. Yet now she was being invited back, not by guilt or memory, but by the very boy who had come into this world during a storm with nothing but a tattered coat to swaddle him and the stars to witness his first cry. Julian had been promoted, just like that, from a bright, idealistic mountain ranger trainee to a full-time team leader. And he wanted her to come for the annual ranger celebration, held at the lookout post where she'd once feared they'd both die. The thought made her stomach twist. But how could she say no to Julian? She watched him now, loading their old red Subaru, wearing the green and beige uniform of the National Search and Rescue Corps, with that signature ranger badge glinting in the sun. He looked like a man, but to her he would always be that slippery, crying, terrifying miracle born in the dark. She hadn't told him everything about that night, not the worst of it, not the hallucinations, not the whispers she thought she'd heard in the trees, as if the forest itself had spoken to her, not how she begged whatever was out there, God, or nature, or something nameless, not to take her child. She'd kept that part sealed, too afraid that saying it aloud would make it real again. As they drove through winding roads thick with evergreens, the altitude rising, Julian pointed out spots he now patrolled, naming caves, ravines, and water sources like he was reciting a prayer. His excitement was palpable, contagious, even. She forced a smile and nodded, but her hands remained clenched on her lap. By the time they reached the ranger station, a modern A-frame cabin with solar panels and a wide observation deck. The clouds had rolled in low, making the horizon look like it was folded in mist. The other rangers greeted her like an honored guest. Someone even called her a legend, the woman who gave birth in the wild and lived to tell it. Julian beamed, but Eva's throat tightened. She didn't feel like a legend. She felt like a ghost who had returned to haunt the place where she'd nearly vanished. That night, a storm gathered, eerily similar to the one from 18 years ago. Rain pinged against the roof while Julian showed slides of rescues he'd led, the last image being of him silhouetted against the sunrise, standing at the exact spot where he was born. He didn't know that, of course, but Eva did. She froze when the photo came up, and Julian, noticing her expression, asked if she was okay. She nodded slowly, then stood, her voice trembling as she said, That's where I brought you into the world." Silence. The kind that vibrates through the chest. Everyone stopped, and Eva, without planning it, began to speak. About the cold, about the pain, about the way she thought she'd die, about the silence of the woods, interrupted only by the sound of her own sobbing. And then Julian's first breath. As her voice cracked, Julian walked to her slowly, like a man wading into deep water, and wrapped his arms around her. She collapsed into his chest, shaking. And in that embrace, she felt 1,000 unsaid things lift from her soul. The next morning, he asked her to do something bold, to hike with him down the trail. Not just any trail, but that trail. The old one. I want you to see it from my eyes now, Mom, he said. Let me lead you this time. Her breath caught, but she nodded. They left at dawn, just the two of them. The mist parted as they walked, his confident steps ahead, hers measured and cautious. The ground was softer than she remembered, the trees taller, the river quieter. They paused where he was born, and Julian knelt, brushing aside pine needles. Right here, he asked. She nodded, tears returning. Right here. He didn't speak. Instead, he planted a small wooden stake with a carved symbol of a mountain and the date. Asterisk born here. 18 years ago. Against all odds, Asterisk the trail back down felt different. Lighter. Like every step unburdened her from the ghosts she had carried alone. Julian turned often to make sure she was okay. He reached for her hand when they approached steep curves, and she realized he wasn't just leading her physically. He was leading her out of her own storm. Out of the place where she'd been stuck in survival mode for 18 years. When they finally emerged at the base where the trees gave way to sunlight and open sky, Eva looked at him, her son, her rescuer, and whispered, "You saved me twice. Once when you were born, and now again." He didn't reply, just squeezed her hand. And in that silence, she knew everything had changed. He had grown into more than a man. He had become the very path she once thought she'd never survive. If you felt this story deep in your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful journeys like this one. Your support means the world. The fog hung low like an old memory, and as Arya stood at the same overlook where her water had broken 18 years ago, the wind whispered like it had the night she thought she wouldn't survive. Her legs trembled, not from fear this time, but from the weight of emotion. Across from her, Caleb adjusted his ranger uniform with pride, the crest on his chest catching the early morning light. "You ready, Mom?" he asked, voice steady, deep, reassuring. The voice of a man who once arrived in the world gasping through a storm. Arya nodded, and together, they stepped forward onto the trail. The descent wasn't easy. Her knees ached, and her balance was no longer what it used to be, but every step was guided by Caleb's outstretched hand, the same hand that had clutched her finger as a newborn, the same one that now held others to safety in storms and landslides. He paused every few minutes, pointing out new shelters he had helped build, recounting stories of hikers he'd rescued, each tale quietly echoing the story of his own birth. Arya listened, tears often blurring her vision, not from sorrow but the fierce swell of maternal pride. "This shelter here," he said, stopping beside a curved stone alcove halfway down the trail, "I built it last winter. For mothers. In case history ever repeats itself." She couldn't speak, only reached out and touched the rough surface, as if feeling the mountain's memory carved into the stone. Further down, they encountered a group of young cadets, rookies Caleb was training. They greeted her with respectful awe, already aware of who she was. Caleb didn't hide her story anymore. He shared it openly, using it to inspire and teach. When they reached the last stretch, where years ago her body had nearly collapsed beneath the pressure of labor and cold, Caleb stopped. "This is where I almost lost you," he said quietly. "But this mountain didn't take you. It gave me you." Arya turned to him, the wind catching strands of her silvering hair. "And now it's given me you again," she whispered. In that moment, mother and son stood still. Around them, the valley breathed, the trees silent witnesses to the journey that had come full circle. When they finally reached the base, a small crowd was waiting. Reporters, rangers, hikers, and a local documentary team that had followed Caleb's rise. But Arya didn't care for the cameras. She looked only at her son, now taller than her, stronger than her, guiding her down not just a trail, but into the next chapter of her life. A trail she once thought would end her story had instead birthed two lives, hers and the one she brought into the world under rain and pine. As they posed for a photo beneath the ranger station's archway, someone asked Caleb, "What does this day mean to you?" He glanced at his mother and smiled softly. "It means she never gave up. So now neither can I." The shutter clicked, and the mountain, older and wiser now, held their story in its silence, etched forever into the earth, where strength was born not from avoiding the storm, but surviving it together. If you felt the power of this full-circle journey, don't forget to like, comment your favorite part, and subscribe for more real-life inspired stories that move the soul.